Diane Simmons, supposed to be just another news anchor sitting next to Tom Tucker, reading the news and setting up cutaway gags. Instead, she became a full-blown serial killer in what might be the darkest episode Family Guy ever did. This woman went from reporting on Quahog's local nonsense to orchestrating murders like she was auditioning for a crime thriller. The whole thing came together in And Then There Were Fewer, which played out like Clue, but with way more actual death. Diane spent years nursing a grudge against James Woods for ruining her career, and instead of, going to therapy or writing an angry memoir, she decided murder was the appropriate response. She killed multiple people just to frame Woods and get her revenge. What makes this wild is that Family Guy usually treats death like a revolving door. People get maimed, exploded, and crushed. Then they're back next episode eating at the Drunken Clam like nothing happened. But Diane? She got permanently deleted by Stewie Griffin of all people, in one of the rare moments where the show actually played things straight and serious. Loretta Brown spent her entire time on the show being the person Cleveland deserved better than. She cheated on him with Quagmire, which is like choosing gas station sushi over a home-cooked meal. Cleveland was out here being the most stable, decent person in Quahog, and she threw it away for a guy whose entire personality is being creepy. Her death is honestly one of the most ridiculous in the entire series. Peter's doing his usual chaos-causing nonsense, and it somehow results in Loretta falling out of a bathtub and dying. It happened during a Cleveland Show crossover episode called Gone with the Wind, which is already a pretty bold title for an episode where someone dies from falling. The thing that makes this weird is that it felt less like a character death and more like cleaning house. Cleveland was getting his own spin-off, so they needed to write Loretta out, and apparently, the writer's room decided the bathtub exit was the way to go. It's dark comedy taken to its absolute limit. Mayor Adam West, the kind of character that could only exist in Family Guy's world. A completely deranged mayor who thought he was still Batman, fought invisible enemies, and made city decisions based on whatever random nonsense popped into his head. He was somehow both the most incompetent and most beloved mayor in television history. When Adam West, the actual actor, passed away in real life, the show had to figure out what to do with a character that was essentially a loving parody of the man himself. They retired the character completely, which is probably the most respectful thing Family Guy has ever done. No jokes, no trying to replace him, just acknowledging that some characters are too connected to their voice actors to continue. The tribute episode Adam West High hit different because it was Family Guy being genuinely emotional. They renamed the high school after him. And for once, the show wasn't trying to undercut the sentiment with a cutaway gag or a chicken fight. It was just a straightforward goodbye to a character who'd been around since the beginning. Hey, by the way, I'm posting pretty consistently here, so it would mean a lot if you could subscribe to the channel and drop a like for the algorithm. Angela, Peter's boss at Pawtucket Brewery, and she spent most of her time being way too competent for the disaster factory that was Peter Griffin's work ethic. She was tough, no nonsense, and somehow managed to keep Peter employed despite him doing everything possible to get fired on a daily basis. Carrie Fisher voiced her, which already made Angela cooler than most Family Guy characters by default. She brought this energy that made Angela feel like a real person stuck managing cartoon chaos. The character worked because Angela wasn't just a punchline. She was someone actually trying to do her job while Peter set things on fire, both literally and metaphorically. When Carrie Fisher passed away in real life, Family Guy did another one of those rare, sincere moments with Angela's funeral in Pawtucket Pete. They didn't try to mine it for jokes or make it weird. It was just a genuine send-off for both the character and the person who brought her to life. Francis Griffin, Peter's dad, and calling him strict is like calling the ocean damp. This man spent Peter's entire childhood and most of his adulthood making him feel like garbage for not being Catholic enough, successful enough, or basically just existing. He was verbally abusive, wrapped in religious righteousness, and every scene with him was deeply uncomfortable in a way the show definitely intended. The wild part about Francis is that his death and Peter's two dads wasn't even the main story. Peter fell on Francis while dressed as a clown, fatally injuring him. And the episode immediately pivoted to Peter discovering his real father was someone else entirely. Francis got killed off just to facilitate a plot twist, which is honestly perfect for a character who spent his whole life making everything about himself. His death meant Peter could finally stop seeking approval from someone who would never give it. It was accidentally therapeutic character development in a show that usually avoids that stuff, like Peter avoids work. Thelma Griffin, Peter's mom, and if Francis was emotionally abusive, Thelma was emotionally absent. She smoked, gambled, and basically ignored Peter his entire life. When she died off-screen from a stroke, the show barely acknowledged it, which somehow felt appropriate for a character who never really acknowledged her own son. Her death opened the episode Mom's the Word, but got almost no focus, which is the most Thelma thing possible. Even in her own death episode, she couldn't be bothered to be the main character. The show was more interested in the mystery of Peter's real dad than mourning the woman who raised him. Killing her off-screen felt like the writers acknowledging they never really knew what to do with her anyway. She existed to explain why Peter was so messed up, and once they'd moved past that, there wasn't much left for her character to do. Jonathan Weed, Peter's boss at the happy-go-lucky toy factory back in the early seasons, before Peter started his revolving door of random jobs. Mr. Weed was this cheerful, wealthy guy who somehow tolerated Peter's nonsense until he very suddenly couldn't because he was dead. His death in Mr. Saturday Night is peak early Family Guy randomness. He chokes on a dinner roll at dinner with the Griffins, and instead of anyone helping him, they all just watch him struggle because Peter assumes he's doing some kind of bit. It's dark humor taken to its absolute limit, and it worked because the show was still finding its voice. It was one of the first times Family Guy killed off a recurring character and actually stuck with it. The show was establishing that death could happen randomly and permanently, which set the tone for all the chaos that would come later. His replacement was Angela, which honestly was an upgrade in terms of character depth. Mr. Weed was basically just nice, rich boss, while Angela actually had personality and history. Horace, the bartender at the Drunken Clam, which meant he was basically the therapist for Peter, Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland's constant nonsense. He served beer, listened to their ridiculous problems, and somehow never kicked them out despite them being the worst customers imaginable. He died in Save the Clam after getting hit in the head by a baseball during a softball game, which is somehow both random and totally predictable for Family Guy. The episode was more about saving the bar than mourning Horace, because that's just how this show handles death unless they're in a serious mood. Jerome buying the bar after Horace's death changed the whole dynamic of the Drunken Clam. Jerome actually engaged with the group's nonsense instead of quietly serving drinks in the background. Horace was the silent observer. Jerome became part of the chaos. The show never really mourned Horace, because he was more of a fixture than a character. Muriel Goldman, Mort's wife and Neil's mom, living a quiet life in Quahog until she became collateral damage in Diane Simmons' murder spree. She showed up in And Then There Were Fewer and got stabbed to death after being wrongly accused of the murders, which is just the worst possible weekend getaway. She didn't do anything wrong, wasn't involved in any revenge plot, just happened to be at the wrong mansion at the wrong time. It gave the episode actual stakes because it proved anyone could die. The Goldman family basically disappeared after this. Mort and Neil still show up occasionally, but they're barely characters anymore. Losing Muriel seemed to take the wind out of their entire family dynamic, which was never that developed to begin with. Bertram, Stewie's evil half-brother created from Peter's sperm donation, which is already a sentence that requires explanation. He was basically Stewie's arch-nemesis, another genius baby bent on world domination. And their rivalry played out like a supervillain saga condensed into diaper commercials. The whole thing was absurd even by Family Guy standards. Two babies having elaborate battles across time and space, building weapons, forming alliances, and genuinely trying to kill each other. Bertram wasn't just a one-off joke, he kept coming back with increasingly elaborate revenge schemes. Stewie finally killed him permanently during their time travel showdown in The Big Bang Theory, which is exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. They literally fought through the beginning of time itself, and Stewie won by erasing Bertram from existence. That's how you commit to a bit. Patrick Peterschmidt, Lois's brother, who turned out to be a mental patient with a serial killer backstory, which is exactly the kind of family drama the Peterschmidts would have. He escaped from an asylum, helped solve a murder, and then just vanished from the show completely like none of it ever happened. The character worked as a dark one-off, giving us insight into how messed up Lois's family really is behind all that old money. But there wasn't really anywhere to go with him after that. You can't just have a serial killer hanging around for Thanksgiving dinner without addressing it constantly. His disappearance is one of those things Family Guy does where they introduce someone with huge implications and then never mention them again. Patrick existing means the Peterschmidt family has even more skeletons than we thought, but the show just moved on. Consuela, the no cleaning lady with the heavily stereotyped accent, and she became one of those characters that aged poorly even while the show was still making new episodes. She worked as a recurring gag for years until Family Guy updated its voice actor policies and realized maybe having a white guy voice a Mexican stereotype wasn't the best look. The character was everywhere for a while, cleaning houses, refusing to work, asking for lemon pledge, and repeating no until it became a meme. She was recognizable enough that people could quote her without even watching the show regularly. When Family Guy started moving away from having white actors voice minority characters, Consuela quietly disappeared. No big announcement, no farewell episode, just less and less screen time until she was gone. It's the television equivalent of quietly removing something from a shelf and hoping nobody notices. John Herbert, also known as Herbert the Pervert, was one of Family Guy's most controversial characters who somehow lasted way longer than he probably should have. He was the creepy old man neighbor whose entire character was built around making uncomfortable jokes about being inappropriate with children, specifically targeting Chris Griffin. For years, Herbert was a regular presence in the show, popping up to make the audience go, "Oh no," while laughing uncomfortably. His character worked in early Family Guy when shock humor was the brand, but as times changed and awareness about these topics increased, Herbert became less funny and more just genuinely uncomfortable. The show gradually phased him out without officially retiring the character. His appearances became rarer and rarer until he basically stopped showing up altogether. Family Guy never acknowledged this shift. They just quietly moved away from a character who represented their most problematic instincts, death. Literally, the personification of death, showing up whenever someone was about to die to escort them to the afterlife. Voiced by Norm Macdonald, he had this casual, almost bored attitude about death that made him perfect for Family Guy's tone. He treated ending people's lives like it was just another day at the office. Death appeared in early episodes as this recurring figure who could be bargained with, tricked, or just annoyed into leaving people alone. He made death feel less serious, which fit perfectly with a show where characters died and came back constantly. Having death be an actual character you could talk to made the whole concept less scary and more absurd. When Norm Macdonald passed away in real life, death essentially died with him. The character was so connected to Norm's specific delivery and timing that replacing him felt wrong. Family Guy had already been using death less frequently, but after Norm's death, the character disappeared completely. Vinnie. The dog is maybe the most hated character in Family Guy history, and that's impressive considering Peter exists. When Brian temporarily died, the show replaced him with Vinnie, a stereotypical tough guy Italian dog from Brooklyn who immediately felt wrong in every possible way. The backlash was instant and massive. Fans revolted so hard that Family Guy brought Brian back through time travel shenanigans within a few episodes, essentially erasing Vinnie from existence completely. It was one of the rare times a show admitted it made a mistake that badly. What made Vinnie fail wasn't even necessarily the character himself, it was the audacity of thinking you could replace Brian Griffin. Brian's been there since episode 1, and he's basically the second main character after Peter. Swapping him out for anyone was going to fail, but Vinnie made it fail spectacularly. The whole situation proved that Family Guy could still surprise its audience, but not always in ways that worked. They killed Brian for shock value, introduced Vinnie to fill the gap, and then had to undo everything because fans weren't having it. Doug, also known as Smug Doug, was Stewie's rival at preschool who embodied everything Stewie hated about other children. He was condescending, superior, and treated preschool like it was Harvard Business School. Their rivalry was this perfect encapsulation of Stewie's genius being wasted on toddler nonsense. The character worked because he was one of the few people who could legitimately get under Stewie's skin. Stewie has death rays and time machines, but Doug could make him furious with just a smug comment about finger painting. It was psychological warfare at the preschool level. Doug died off-screen in a commuter plane crash in The Candidate, which is such a random and anticlimactic end for a recurring character. The show just casually mentioned it and moved on, treating a preschooler's death with the same energy as canceling a dentist appointment. His death ended one of Stewie's few ongoing rivalries with someone his own age. Without Doug, Stewie lost a regular antagonist who challenged him in ways that didn't involve time travel or multiverse nonsense. Sometimes you need a rival who just really gets on your nerves. Jake Tucker, the upside-down head kid who showed up in early seasons as one of Quahog's many background weirdos. His face was literally upside down, and that was his entire character. No explanation, no origin story, just a kid whose face defied physics and everyone acted like it was normal. He appeared regularly through season 14 as part of the show's commitment to having inexplicably bizarre background characters. After season 14, Jake just vanished without explanation. No death, no moving away, just gone. For a character whose whole thing was being visually impossible, disappearing without explanation is weirdly fitting. He was there until he wasn't. His absence barely registered because he was never really a character, more like a visual gag that walked around. Family Guy has so many random background weirdos that losing one doesn't change much. Olivia Fuller, Stewie's rival child star, who appeared in the show's musical-themed episodes as this ultra-talented, ultra-annoying kid who could sing and dance better than Stewie. She was everything Stewie wanted to be professionally, which made her the perfect antagonist for his theatrical ambitions. Their rivalry had actual stakes because both of them were good at performing. It wasn't like Doug where it was just psychological warfare. Olivia could actually back up her confidence with talent. She made Stewie work harder. which is rare for a character who's usually the smartest person in any room. She disappeared after season 16 without any explanation, which is weird considering how developed their rivalry was. Family Guy clearly invested in her character, gave her multiple episodes, and then just stopped using her. Maybe they ran out of musical episode ideas, or maybe they realized having too many Stewie rivals was redundant. Jillian. Brian's ditzy ex-girlfriend, and she was one of his most developed relationships despite being played mostly for jokes about her being dumb. She was sweet, kind, and genuinely cared about Brian, which made him look even worse when he inevitably messed it up. The relationship worked because Jillian represented Brian's pattern of self-sabotage. He dated someone who actually liked him, then couldn't handle that she wasn't intellectual enough for his pretentious standards. It was Brian being Brian in the worst possible way. She vanished after season 16 without any closure or explanation. Her disappearance left Brian's love life even more random and aimless than it already was. At least Jillian gave him some consistency, even if the relationship was dysfunctional. Without her, Brian just cycles through random women who appear and disappear without impact. Patty Tanager. The big whoop wanna fight about it? Guy who showed up specifically to be annoying and start fights. His entire personality was being confrontational about nothing, which made him perfect for random gag appearances when someone needed to be unreasonably aggressive. The character was a one-note joke that somehow worked repeatedly. Every time he appeared, you knew exactly what was coming, and it was still funny because the bit was so committed. He was aggressive for no reason, and that was the joke. Stewie finally ended him by running him over with a tank in Hell Comes to Quahog, which is the most over-the-top death possible for a character whose whole thing was picking fights. It's like Stewie said, "You want to fight about something? Fight this tank." Jasper Griffin. Brian's flamboyant cousin from earlier seasons who showed up for a few episodes and then completely vanished. He was this stereotypically gay character who existed mostly to make jokes about being gay in the mid-2000s, which already tells you why he probably shouldn't come back. When he appeared, Jasper was actually a fun character beyond the stereotype. He had personality, history with Brian, and brought a different energy to the show. But Family Guy's handling of LGBTQ+ characters in those early seasons was questionable at best, and Jasper was part of that awkward phase. His disappearance tracks with Family Guy trying to move away from some of its more dated humor. Characters like Jasper worked in 2005 but feel uncomfortable now. And the show has quietly retired several characters rather than figure out how to update them. Retap of an evil clone of Peter that appeared in Meg Stinks and was genuinely one of the weirdest one-off concepts the show ever did. He was Peter spelled backwards, he was evil, and that was basically it. The character existed purely for one episode's worth of jokes and was never mentioned again. Family Guy does this sometimes where they introduce something completely insane, use it for 20 minutes, and then pretend it never happened. Retap is the perfect example of this phenomenon. Dylan Flanigan. Brian's son introduced in season 6 and the whole storyline was surprisingly heartfelt for Family Guy. Brian discovering he had a teenage son and trying to connect with him was actual character development in a show that usually avoids that stuff. The episodes featuring Dylan showed Brian trying to be a father figure, despite being completely unprepared for it. It gave Brian depth beyond being the pretentious voice of reason or Peter's drinking buddy. He had legitimate stakes and emotional investment in someone other than himself. After a few episodes, Dylan completely disappeared from the show. No explanation, no follow-up, just gone. For a character who represented such a significant development in Brian's life, vanishing without resolution is wild. Brian literally has a son who just stopped existing. And that's every deleted Family Guy character explained. Comment down what character you think should be brought back to the show. If you enjoyed this video, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so please subscribe, and thanks for watching.